Your baby laughs at everything dad does. The silly faces, the weird voices, the ridiculous peekaboo variations that make absolutely no sense. Full belly laughs every single time. But when you try the exact same thing, you get a blank stare, maybe a courtesy smile if you're lucky, and you're standing there wondering what is happening, whether your own child finds you fundamentally unfunny, whether there's something wrong with your bond. Here's what neuroscience actually says about why your baby laughs more at one parent than the other, and it has nothing to do with who they love more. First, let me tell you what this is not. It's not favoritism in the way you're imagining it. It's not a referendum on your parenting. And it's definitely not permanent. What it is one of the most fascinating demonstrations of how infant brains learn to process humor, social connection, and emotional communication. But to understand why the laughter gap exists, you need to know something most parents never learn about how baby laughter actually develops. A baby's first laugh typically appears somewhere between 14 and 18 weeks of age, regardless of culture or country. This timing is not random. It coincides precisely with a major reorganization happening inside the infant brain, specifically in the regions responsible for social cognition and emotional processing. At this stage, laughter is mostly reflexive, triggered by stimuli like unexpected sounds or movements. Your baby isn't laughing because something is funny. They're laughing because their developing nervous system just fired in a particular pattern. But something shifts dramatically around 5 to 6 months. Babies stop treating laughter as a pure reflex and start using it as social communication. They begin connecting the act of laughing with engagement, with sharing a moment, with sending a signal to another person. And this is where the parent difference starts to show up in ways that catch people completely off guard. Research teams studying infant humor development ran a deceptively simple experiment. They instructed 30 parents to make their babies laugh without touching them. Most parents immediately went to physical comedy. Exaggerated faces, absurd uses of objects, blowing raspberries, wildly theatrical versions of normal activities. By 6 months of age, 60% of babies laughed at these performances. But here's what the researchers noticed when they analyzed the footage frame by frame. The parents who got the most laughter weren't necessarily doing the funniest things. They were doing something else, something most of them didn't even realize they were doing. About 65% of the time, when parents performed their silly routines, they paired the absurdity with their own visible enthusiasm. They smiled while making the funny face. They laughed while doing the ridiculous voice. They broadcast their own delight, not just visually through their expressions, but acoustically through their tone. And the babies responded to that emotional signal more than they responded to the silly behavior itself. Your baby isn't learning what's funny by analyzing the objective humor content of your peekaboo game. They're learning what's funny by reading your face, your voice, your entire emotional broadcast. When you signal that something is delightful, safe, and joyful, your baby's brain receives permission to find it amusing. This is called affect matching. And it's one of the primary mechanisms through which infants develop their sense of humor in the first year of life. Which brings us to the real reason one parent gets more laughs. And it has everything to do with something happening below the level of conscious awareness. The parent who gets more baby laughs isn't trying harder. They're broadcasting differently, and most of the time, they have no idea they're doing it. Some parents naturally amplify their emotional signals during play. Their faces light up bigger. Their voices swing wider in pitch and energy. Their whole body communicates delight. Others are more reserved, more subtle in their expressions, equally loving but quieter in how that love shows up physically. To an adult, these differences seem minor, barely worth noticing. To a baby's developing brain, specifically to the neural systems responsible for reading emotional information, these differences are enormous. Here's what makes this even more specific. One parent might be absolutely hilarious, objectively creative in their play, doing elaborate, silly voices and perfectly timed physical comedy. But if their face remains relatively neutral while they perform, if they're not smiling or laughing themselves, the baby often won't laugh either. The humor doesn't land because the emotional permission isn't there. The baby's brain is scanning for the signal that says, "This is joyful and safe," and without that broadcast, the joke falls flat. The parent who gets fewer laughs can change this almost overnight just by changing one thing: Laugh at your own material. Smile bigger when you do the silly voice. Let your face show the delight you actually feel. Your baby isn't judging your comedic skill. They're reading your emotional output and using it to decide how they should feel. Now, let me tell you about the familiarity factor, because it complicates everything I just said. Babies often laugh more at the parent they spend less time with. Not because that parent is funnier, but because novelty itself is stimulating. The parent who's been gone all day becomes interesting simply by virtue of absence. Their face, their voice, their presence carries a charge of newness that the stay-at-home parents doesn't. This can feel brutally unfair if you're the one who's been doing the heavy caregiving all day, but it's pure neuroscience. The brain prioritizes novel stimuli. Always has. Always will. The opposite pattern happens too. Some babies laugh more freely with their primary caregiver because that relationship provides the safety required for play. When a baby feels completely secure, when there's zero background anxiety about where this person is or whether they'll stay, they relax into joy more easily. Laughter requires a nervous system that feels safe enough to let go. Both patterns are normal. Both will shift as your baby grows. The parent who gets all the laughs at 6 months might get none of them at 9 months. Preferences flip without warning because the developmental needs driving those preferences are constantly evolving. By around 6 months, babies start using laughter strategically. They learn it gets a reaction, so they deploy it deliberately. This is when you'll see a baby fake laugh to get attention, testing whether the sound alone can summon the response they want. It's sophisticated, it's also temporary. Within weeks, they'll move on to testing something else. If your baby laughs more at your partner, it doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. It means you're different people with different interaction styles, and your baby is responding to those differences in completely predictable, neurologically normal ways. The laughs will balance out. The preferences will shift. What won't change is that both of you are building the architecture your child will use to understand humor, connection, and joy for the rest of their life. That's happening whether they're laughing at you or not. So, the next time your baby cracks up at your partner's mediocre peekaboo while barely acknowledging your objectively superior routine, remember what's actually happening. Their brain is reading emotional broadcasts you didn't know you were sending. And those preferences you're seeing right now, they'll be completely different in 3 months. The laughs aren't the point. The connection is.